This week we're doing things a little differently. My co-hosts are out of action, so I've had to call in some serious reinforcements. And who better than our resident support system, Marmalade. Pietri Marmalade Riedlinges, founder at Herenia Capital, is joining me once again. Let's start with developments out of China. They're having the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit. Very long-worded thing that abbreviates into a very interesting thing if you read it from a Chinese perspective, but we'll get to that.
Disclaimer to begin with.
Yeah.
I'm just the reinforcements, I'm not the pro, right?
No, you're very quality reinforcements. The China conversation is very investor focused at the moment. It seems as though a couple of African countries have gone through to China to try and drum up some relationships, some investments and all of that. And I find a couple of things interesting coming out of this is China's made commitments. Xi Jinping said $50 billion over the next 3 years into Africa. And we know this about all investments and all foreign direct investments. It's never without strings, is it?
And particularly not from China. I mean, if you look at what they've done in Zambia, for example, it's like, we'll build you an airport. You can pay us back for it. Oh, you can't pay? Oh, this is our airport now.
That's it. Right? We take ownership of the airport.
I think they also got their fingers in the public broadcaster in Zambia in much the same way.
Yeah.
So what is interesting, though, from the Zambian perspective, a U.S. delegation was sent there some time ago, and they said, the U.S. delegation was all about, don't do business with China, they're just bullies. And the, Zambian government official actually said, look, you land at a Chinese-built airport, you drive on a Chinese-built road, and you talk in a Chinese-built community center, and you tell us not to do business with China. We should choose you. What have you done
awkward.
For us? Right? So yes, a lot of strings attached. China aren't doing this, for love and fairies. They're doing this because they want to make profit. What do we have that they don't? Commodities. Right? So there's obviously an angle in it for them. But I guess this goes back to something we spoke about a little while ago as well. I'm not sure on which forum it was, if it was this or the radio station or
We've
whatever.
done a lot of conversations.
But, this shift from west to east and how South Africa is positioned for that. So let's just zoom out and say Africa is positioned for that. We are more aligned with the east than we are with the West. So I think that from that perspective, it makes sense that African countries are dealing with China because China is the only one really actually putting meat on the table. Look, we've got the AGOA pact with the Americans, but if you compare that to the amount of benefit we derive from Eastern countries, BRICS nations, if you will, I think that it's considerably more.
I think the other thing, and to your point, Pietri, around this, that makes it especially interesting is when we look at what the African continent needs. It needs beneficiation. It needs infrastructure development. It needs resources to be put into the continent so that we can upskill the continent. It does not need minerals being extracted, processed somewhere else, and then sold back into the continent, which again is debatable because China's done that as well.
That's exactly what they're going to do, right?
All global countries but the positioning of Africa, to your point around the positioning of Africa against East and West, is more and more people are coming alive to the fact that Africa is essential to these things, and it's no longer the Africa where you can come in, colonize, take, leave, and move on. It's the Africa where you kind of have to structure a relationship that works for you. Now, whether or not, and this is probably the African side of it more so, where I spoke to an economist who suggests that when we go into these conversations as Africa, we need to articulate clearly, whether it's to the West or the East, what we want in return. Africa's failure in the past has been a failure to identify what it is that the continent wants to get, or the country that wants to get out of that particular deal. It's always been China wants to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but we say, we just want a road, or we just want this. And then we don't realize that in doing that, the deal that's structured doesn't actually benefit us.
So this is, fire me if you must, but I was having a conversation with a friend of mine over the weekend about this. If you look at people who come from wealth, call them countries, they tend to spend a lot more time on activities such as, finding out who they are, what their hobbies are, being healthy, spending a lot of introspective time in getting to know what's really important to them, what their value system is, and so on. And if you look at people who come from very poor backgrounds, they spend a lot of their effort and time on, what can I get? So the conversation was around why do some people, on the weekends spend weekends going hiking and doing this and doing that and being outside and doing meditative processes and yoga and all these things, while other people are just out drinking all the time. And it's because there's a scarcity mindset in the people who are out in the restaurants and the taverns and the pubs, and they're out there basically just saying, I've never had
You're not
it before.
used to the abundance.
I have a little bit of money now. Let me just consume as much as I possibly can. Is where the people who are from a background where there's abundance go, well, these things are nice. I've tasted all the food that there is to taste. But what's really important to me? And I think that's where the African continent falls a bit short. We come from a state of scarcity, from a mindset of scarcity. So it's like, oh, the Chinese want to build a road? Great. Let me build a road. What's in it for me?
You say that, and as you say that, I smile because I had the exact same conversation at dinner last night around the China conversation, to say it's comfortable for someone that has choice, that has the
to
freedom.
Dictate what we should be doing.
Yes,
Yeah,
and I used a different example from a country perspective. I used the example of Norway. Norway, as a Nordic region, is pushing socialism so hard. They're probably the most socialist country in the world,
but they
financed it with capitalism by selling their oil.
Yeah.
So again, it comes back to the capitalism socialism side of it.
It's interesting how people in the West today are praising socialism.
Yes, because they got the chance to live through
Polish
capitalism.
Person that's about our age, how they feel about it, and they'll tell you socialism.
So if you had the opportunity to live through capitalism, to benefit from capitalism, you can now make different decisions and say, I'm done being a capitalist, I'm being a socialist. And it sounds very much like the first conversation we had.
It's never going to work, to be honest, because it is going to implode on itself. If every capitalist suddenly turns to a socialist, who's going to pay the bills, Jimmy?
But this was the conversation we had the first time you joined us on the pod, right? Was to say the world is governed by both. They can coexist, and it's about how they interact with one another that probably determines it. And that's probably what's happening with the China-Africa investment conversation. But also, I think the other element of it, as we wrap up the China conversation, is the aspect of the age, right? You and I have had a conversation about this, to say the Chinese population is aging, whilst Africa has probably the youngest population in the world. And so now you're seeing that people are like, okay, if I'm thinking about the next 10, 15, 20 years, I need to do it with a population that's going to be still young enough to be able to carry that through. Yeah. And perhaps that's the play, that's the fight between the West and the East, to say there's the population where the labor is, or where the workforce could be, or where the opportunity could be as well, even if it's not labor related. Opportunity for minerals, opportunity for investment.
I think I'll be a little bit more pessimistic than that. I think that, and sue me, China, if you must, but I think that at the end of the day, everybody's kind of in it for themselves. China's not coming to Africa and building community centers and roads for us because they've got our best interest at heart. It's because they want to pillage, and that they've been doing this. This is the new colonization.
But it's
a weird conversation to have. But I think
where the conversation around
there's money in it for them, and that's why they're doing it.
Yeah, and this is where the conversation around Africa protecting itself.
Yeah, we should absolutely be dealing with them. I 100% agree. Yeah. But to your point, we have to be a bit more clear about what do we want from a sustainable perspective, and not let's go green. Yes. How do we build communities? How do we educate people? How do we increase healthcare and safety and policing and those things? Those are things that we need here.
How do we
create
develop
a holistic, cohesive society, to create a better world for the people that live here? That's what we need to have conversation.
How do you use these international relationships to build communities?
Yeah, exactly. What happens a lot of the time is the international relationships come in, and a few fat cats make a lot of money, and everybody else just stays where they are, right? Or in some cases are worse off because now there's a mine where there used to be a river. So that is a conversation I think that our leaders need to have. But the problem is that our leaders in Africa come from a scarcity mindset. And who can blame them? Because they've been pillaged for last couple of 100 years, right? So there's a big, almost cultural shift that needs to happen. I think the most important thing, if we can demand anything from China, it's the discipline in their schools. We need to build schools, and we need to get Chinese teachers to come and teach us. And it sounds like a crazy idea, but if you've seen some of the differences between the levels of discipline in schools in America versus China, or schools in South Africa versus that in China, all the kids are healthy. All of them have their favorite foods like fruit and vegetables and stuff, because they're taught that that is what's good for them. They're taught that that is what's healthy. They're a disciplined people. We're not.
I think the discipline side of it, I'm inclined to agree with you to a certain extent. I think some of it doesn't come down to discipline, but also comes down to that scarcity mindset that you're saying, where I am disciplined, I approach the situation disciplined, but when I look at my leadership is not disciplined. They are the ones that are that's part of a bigger problem that needs to be addressed. But from an investment perspective, as we reflect on the announcements and the conversations that are happening in Beijing at the moment, it's clear to see that the African continent is...
It's really hot right now.
It is.
And it's going to be for the next generation or two. I think Africa is really where the opportunities are. And I think also, I mean, we're kind of cut out of that agreement because it's for the 30 smallest countries.
And we're probably the largest.
And we're probably the biggest, so we're not going to benefit too much. But hey, if our neighbors benefit, we're going to benefit.
That should spill over to us, right?
And dare I say it, if things go better in the rest of the continent, maybe we can stem some of the immigration problems we have. Putting that out there.
We'll circle back to that. That's the deep dive.